we're moving into a totally different kind of format where we're going to kind of just do a big overview of the triangle, and then in the next video we're going to be talking about arm bars. The reason why Rob actually had the idea for this because this is something that we don't talk too much about at all in our fundamentals program at Island Top Team, but especially with the situation here where we're teaching you on YouTube, you're going to be dabbling with submissions, and especially these submissions from the bottom position. White belts, when they don't understand alignment, the control of these positions, or thinking even of these submissions as positions of control, they just end up getting their guards passed a lot.
Yeah, this is so. The thing that most schools will teach you first is the thing that we will show you last. And like I said in our one, or like Rory said in our one-on-one program, never. Just so you're clear on what we're talking about here. What we mean by this is, Rory's in my guard, and I'm like, yeah, I know what a triangle choke is. This is white belt life, and honestly, blue belt life at a lot of places. This is the reason we talked about alignment and all these positions. Is like this is the last thing you should learn as a jiu-jitsu practitioner when you're being exposed to what jiu-jitsu is, because you don't have the skill to break your opponent's alignment enough to do stuff to them from the bottom of guard reliably. Not never. Obviously, if you're doing it against another white belt and they're stupider than you are, then you're gonna get the. Or we talked about this earlier on in the series. If you haven't watched it, beginners constantly break their own alignment. So people will put their head down, stick their arm out for you, and put themselves in a triangle choke. And then all you have to do is actually just close the loop and finish the choke. That doesn't mean that you are good at triangle chokes. So yeah, we just want to talk about, what are the actual mechanics?
Yep.
Right? Where do we need to put their neck, our legs, et cetera, and just talk a little bit about when is it realistic for you to go for it, when is it not. Mostly we want to encourage you to not go for the arm bar from the guard as much. The triangle, way more reliable. The arm bar from the guard as a beginner is just asking to get your guard passed. But we'll talk about that in the arm bar video.
Yeah, so let's just go over the triangle choke for those that don't know the triangle or might be stuck with some of the older choking mechanics.
Yeah, so the first idea that you want to keep in mind with triangles, and this is equally important to the person on top, is 2 arms in is fine, 2 arms out is fine, 1 arm in, 1 arm out is not fine. Now, if Rory's doing this, he's probably going to be fine, because if I try to triangle, I haven't affected his posture yet, and he'll just close his structure. So it's not a big deal. But if I'm actually able to get a posture break and force him out of alignment, then I can start worrying about choking him, provided I've just got the 1 arm in here. Our goal is to take our hamstring and place it on one side of the neck.
Almost chokes me right there.
Yeah, like you can see like Rory's shoulder. So we talked about this a little bit with the rear naked choke. Chokes are triangles, basically, regardless if it's the actual triangle choke or not. One side of the triangle is my hamstring. Another side of the triangle is my calf on the back of his neck. And the third side of the triangle is Rory's shoulder. So like as I do this, he's being choked. If you're not doing anything to affect this, you're going to have problems. So that's the main thing you kind of want to know is, do I have the ability to affect all 3 sides of the triangle? The calf side of the triangle is a backstop, as we refer to it, or as Ryan Hall originally referred to it probably. And this prevents Rory from posturing up. So aside from the choke mechanics, which is to say hamstring, calf, and then the shoulder, usually the way that we teach it is to scrape the shoulder into the neck so that our knee bypasses it, and then we close the triangle for like super emphasis.
But as I'm sure you're kind of doing from like I felt, Rob doesn't even have to close the triangle at first when you're kind of working on the mechanics of it.
Yeah, and so like when we go into on BJJ Concepts, our triangle choke module is like 60 videos.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of stuff that you can do surrounding this. So that's the basics of the choke, right?
And so what's interesting here, and I mean this has been talked about for a long time. Ryan Hall has an excellent video on the finishing mechanics of the triangle. Is the difference now of creating a dominant angle to it to use, as Ryan put it, big manly muscles to finish the submission, rather than just trying to squeeze with the weaker muscles. We're talking about over-engineering the choke to an extent, as we talked about with the rear naked, where your legs are such a strong part of your body that once you fit my head and neck and my shoulder in there, it's pretty easy to crush everything inside. But you're going to be much more effective and efficient and you're going to shut down a lot of different defenses that I might
Doing
have if
this versus
yeah.
this.
So what you'll usually kind of see in the more old school approach, and I mean it can certainly work, is Rob locks the triangle here,
Right.
completely straight on, which usually incorporates a little more of my back, and so it's not going to be as efficient. And now because I'm straight on, my ability to still be able to actually possibly stack Rob and get my arms involved in some way while Rob's now squeezing is much weaker. Where if he can create the angle right now, it's stronger. And I mean, that was just like a fraction of how far you could go when you're now looking to actually engage your quadriceps and your hamstrings into it. Oh, it's just going to absolutely crush everything inside.
Yeah, so that dominant angle is the next kind of ingredient. So we talked about sort of the essence of the triangle being hamstring, calf, and then their shoulder into the side of the neck. The dominant angle is the other thing, and then the ability to prevent someone from picking you up. Now this is depending on where you train, who you train with, how big your training partners are. People may not be able to pick you up, but you may be a smaller person, and people may be able to pick you up. In jiu-jitsu competition, you're not allowed to pick people up and drop them. In a fight, you absolutely are, and it's encouraged. And in a street self-defense scenario, a triangle choke, this is why I'm so against beginners learning triangle choke. Some poor 100-pound woman learns a triangle choke in her first week of jiu-jitsu, goes and does it, guy picks her up and brains her off the concrete and she dies. Like, you literally are teaching people something that could kill them if they do it wrong. So what we want to be aware of is when we're choking somebody, can they now bring their hips underneath us? And to that effect, we want to be hooking under the leg. And if that's not available, let's turn to this side so people can see. To that effect, if I can't get the leg, I at least want the arm so that you can see at the angle that my body's at, Rory would have to be like the mountain to pick me up from here, right? If we have our bodies right in front of our partners, if we don't have the leg hooked, then we're not compromising their ability to fix their alignment. We're not hanging off of them kind of like a pendulum at the end of their spine nearly as effectively. And we're taking the chance that they pick us up and drop us on our head.
Yeah, just I get a break from this.
Yeah.
Look at the difference of Rob's position here when his spine is aligned with mine. And if he's able to posture up here, it's pretty easy for him to pick me up. As I start adjusting myself off to the side, my center of gravity will naturally move a little bit off to the side of him. How I affect his structure certainly helps too. We can always control the head to continue to break posture. And if he starts to stand, but I can anchor myself to his leg, unless he can levitate, even if he can start to posture up a little bit, he can't get his foot off the mat. And so this is where, like when you watch like old Rampage Jackson videos and stuff like that, it's like you'll see internet keyboard warriors being like, oh, if he had only just turned an angle and collected the leg, would have been a little bit more safe. And it's true, easier said than done when you have Rampage Jackson trying to beat you down and trying to powerbomb you.
Yeah, exactly. So the elements of the triangle choke that you need to focus on are these three that we've talked about within the context of still broken alignment. So we've kind of shown you what the triangle choke should look like. One thing we should mention that is not a big deal, and again, depending on where you train, you'll be told it's a big deal and that it's a necessary ingredient. It's like, I don't want to say those people are wrong, but they're wrong. The requirement that you must pull the arm across to the side of the hip. Don't get me wrong, this totally helps, but like I'm squeezing my balls off right now, and it took a little while for Rory to be affected by the choke. Whereas if I get,
we just get ready for this next one that's about to happen.
why don't you do that one? And so in this case, I'm gonna have my arm all the way on this side. Oh God, and that's instantaneous. So the operative mechanism here is the rotation of the shoulder into the neck, which can be done with the arm across, but it also can be screwed up. If Rory has, let me just open my elbow a little bit more. There we go. So Rory's got my elbow across, but this side of my neck is still somewhat open. Even if I get all the way down to here, you can see how I'm keeping my shoulder away from my neck. Now don't get me wrong, Rory's still going to probably be able to finish me there if I just hang out and do nothing, but I'm buying myself time, and depending on who you're dealing with, obviously if you're a white belt, you're not going to be an expert at the triangle at the beginning, so people will still be able to, even with their elbow across their body, will still be able to keep their shoulder open, and people with their elbow on this side of their body are still.
Arguably gets more internal rotation to the shoulder because
Yeah.
of how my hip will access your elbow as a lever there.
Yeah, so again, we're not saying it's wrong. It's great to pull the elbow across, but it's not necessary. And plenty of people who are, you know, elite world-class triangle people do it with the elbow on the other side and still finish people. I'm not elite world-class triangle person, but for the most part, I do it with the elbow on the other side. I don't ever bother bringing the elbow across the hip. And I've got, you know, it's one of my more reliable submissions in competition at black belt. So.
Okay, so now let's talk about entries, and obviously we're not going to be covering entries too much, but it's the idea of alignment. And maybe you guys are sick of listening to us talk about this shit, but it's so important because we're all guilty of this as white belt. We're trying to throw up a triangle from closed guard or whatever guard we're doing, but we don't affect structure very much. We don't affect posture. Base is usually going to be kind of like the same situation every time, but what you kind of referenced earlier is that a white belt that we're going up against will probably break the structure for us.
Yeah.
As I have closed guard on Rob, Rob ends up just doing something bad.
Like white belts will literally just be like, I'm gonna pry your guard open and put themselves in triangles.
So depending on how much they affect themselves, it'll be easy to do. But say even like the bullshit closed guard opening where Rob ends up just having his arm up in the air, digging his elbow down, so it's really crappy structure. Now this bullshit kind of simplistic entry of me pushing the hand to the chest and just being able to throw a triangle is there. But at the same time, we can see that Rob's posture is unaffected. And so if I throw right here, I'm not able to actually get my knees past his neck, and I can never actually hold on to him. Or even if I do clasp together, I mean, this is still me winning a certain range battle, but the battle that I have to have now with Rob here to try and break him down is just, oh man, what a battle that's going to be. Or even just something as simple as making sure that if I can control Rob's posture, it starts to create a dominant angle off to the side to now do similar moves, but now with a position of advantage that I'm going to be able to now start cinching up the control and then creating my angle after the fact to now finish that triangle. Rob never had the chance to defend it properly from the beginning.
Yeah, so every setup, every entry that we do, if we want it to work on good people, is going to involve those elements of creating a dominant angle with our hips. So that can just be done with a hip movement like Rory just did. My favorite setup, probably our favorite, is the hip bump to triangle.
So we're getting more dynamic ones where it's like as Rob is kind of leaning back a bit more, I can come up and I create a bump that now affects Rob's posture but also really commits weight into his hand so that then I'm able to more dynamically jump into the triangle. But I did a break in alignment by first knocking his center of gravity off the side, forcing him to post, creating that reliable response, and then being able to take advantage of that vulnerability.
Yeah, exactly. So when you're looking for, making a judgment call on, do I want to bother learning this triangle? Just go through that checklist. Is the entry actually creating a dominant angle and breaking our opponent's alignment in such a way that regardless of their skill level, they're forced into a position where you at least have a crack at the triangle. Doesn't mean you're always going to finish it. Some people are incredibly difficult to finish, even if you do everything right. But the idea is that they should be vulnerable, and then your skill in finishing the position will determine whether you get there or not. So that's the first thing, and then you kind of go through the checklist. Am I getting to that angle where I'm using these strong forward kind of facing muscles? Am I getting the shoulder into the neck? Not really worrying so much about the position of the elbow, more about the shoulder. Do I control the person well enough so that they can't just pick me up and bomb my head off the ground? As long as you hit all of those things, you're gonna be reliable. You're gonna be good, and there's gonna be different versions. Like we just really showed the very basic leg triangle, the sort of front triangle. There's reverse triangles and back triangles and side triangles. And there's different ways of finishing the triangle when people resist. You can switch off from the triangle to the omoplata. And there's a world out there. And you can do triangles from the top. The triangle entries from side control and mount are extremely reliable because now you're not faced with that problem of if I screw this up, they're passing my guard. There's a whole universe out there. We recommend Ryan Hall's triangle material, old. It's 10 years old now, probably the triangle instructional that Ryan did, and is still really valid. I'm sure he's got more updated thoughts on it, as do we, as does the community, but you won't go wrong with his instructional, and of course we've got some stuff on our sites.
Yeah, so now problems that you'll end up usually facing, and depending on how much you break somebody's alignment, you're gonna have to kind of gauge this, because if you're going up against someone smaller than you, this pass throw by where they extract their head isn't as much of a risk. Where I know even as a black belt against Barinder or Mark, guys much bigger than me that like these kind of pressure passes, even if I can break their posture a little bit, I'm like, well, alignment's in my favor. I'm still like, you know what, I'm not gonna go for this. So what I'm talking about is if we start to commit to this triangle and we risk starting to lose the head, where I'm able to start stacking Rob in some way, and then
like right now,
I'm pulling my leg out.
This actually happened to me yesterday at Open Mat with Mark. I was greedy and I fucking got.
You'll see certain big guys even bait that triangle and they'll have their arm in, and if their posture's not broken, they look pretty relaxed and they got an arm in and an arm out, and you know that they're at least a colored belt, it's like, something's not right here. It's almost like they're baiting.
So the thing to keep in mind here when you're doing a triangle, if things start to go to that angle where like this is slipping, just back the fuck up and go back to guard, right? And this will go for any attack from the guard where you feel that somebody's starting to turn this corner on you. If your knee gets to your chin or your shoulder, you're done. They're definitely going to pass your guard now. So let's rewind. Anytime that angle is starting to be hit, we want to just be blocking that shoulder. I can take my other foot, place it on his hip, bring this foot onto his biceps, or I can just swing my leg back out. And even if he keeps his arm underneath, I now know, he's still baiting me, I now know I was not going to get there on my first try. I'm certainly not going to get there on the second try now that he knows what's coming. So I'll just play my guard here and do something different.
Because once again, that battle of alignment, just because I'm like this, a white belt might be like, hey, Rory's about to get triangle. But at the same time, my elbows are close to my sides. My one elbow is still a little bit here at the hip. I got good posture. I'm so ready to start trying to pass from here. Not even a concern at all in my eyes.
Yeah, like when we say you need one arm in and one arm out to do a triangle, that's one of the factors, right? There's also the broken alignment. There's me having a dominant angle. I don't have broken alignment on Rory. He's got posture, he's got structure, he's got base, and I don't have a dominant angle. If I try to shoot my triangle at him, all I'm giving him is access to levers on my body, right? If he had his arm underneath me, but I had this and I had this, then I'm still not guaranteed because Rory's posture is pretty good. But if I add this now, then I'm definitely going to triangle him. So it's not like you can have one ingredient, one arm in, one arm out, and always reliably triangle people. That's the biggest bait that people give you, is because it's a heuristic, one arm in, one arm out, or both arms in, or whatever. But that's more simplistic. It's too simplistic, and it's more for the beginners on top. We tell them, hey, 2 arms in or 2 arms out, and you're safe from triangles, just to give them something that will basically always work. You can't be triangled if both arms are in. You can't be triangled if both arms are out. So as a beginner, don't stick one arm in randomly. That's what it's for. It's definitely not a guarantee, and that's why we emphasize alignment so much and not just the one arm thing.
So this range battle is super important to understand when it's starting to fail for you, and you're going to have a hard time letting go because you just made such a gain, such an advantage on your opponent. You're like, oh my god, I'm so close to getting the triangle.
Such an advantage, right? Like,
you think it's an advantage. I can't let this go.
Yeah.
And it's also difficult because, as we talked about that dominant angle that's being created, that pass ends up turning to that dominant angle, and so you're like, nah, I'm even more likely to finish this. But if you start sliding over the jaw, you start losing the elbow, you're not scraping the shoulder, there's going to be these things that as you get more comfortable with the submission, you're going to be able to recognize earlier when you're losing it. You're also going to eventually learn more problem-solving ways of being able to still keep the control. But like Rob said, we actually have to start aborting and letting go. So as Rob turns here, let's just back up a bit. As he starts to turn, I have to be framing the hip, I have to be framing that shoulder, stopping him from being able to walk around the side, and I want to get my knee off of his shoulder, because right now he can access as a lever, and if I'm starting to try and open this leg up, his ability to start moving into single under or double under, or into knee stapling, very strong from here. So what I want to start doing is opening up my legs and getting that knee off of his shoulder, so I can start getting myself back into a guard, taking away that lever advantage that he had.
And that's one of those things that, like, we don't like to be the life coach types, because any jiu-jitsu coach that's trying to tell you shit about how to live your life is probably full of it. But this is a really great sort of transfer into general life, which is, if you haven't heard of the sunk cost fallacy, this is a perfect example of sunk cost. I got so close to the triangle. If I let go, I'm giving up all that work. No, you're giving up the opportunity to get your guard passed and just eat shit for the rest of the round. And the earlier you start to recognize stuff like that.
So when you lose $1,000 in cryptocurrency and you're like, I want to put another $1,000 in cryptocurrency.
Yeah, exactly.
So now I was thinking just like some rapid fire, just throwing out some different answers and stuff for you guys, because this was kind of like the overview we want to go for, just to try and instill some concepts and some important things to think about so that you don't completely shit the bed when you're trying to go for this thing. But, I mean, this is a position of control. We shouldn't be looking at the triangle or the arm bar or omoplata triangle. Any of these submissions is just a submission by itself. We want to think of it as a position, like mount, like side control. There are entries, there are exits, there are a bunch of problem-solving choices we can have there.
Yeah.
And
transitions to other
transitions, like we look at taking these submission systems and positional systems and intersecting them, finding these intersection points that we can connect this stuff together. And this is where you see black belts tying this stuff together, and you're just like, man, that's so fluid, it's so cool. And it's like, well, it's all pretty planned out and mapped, where it's like they have the opportunity to go to these different areas if one thing fails. So if I'm in the triangle and I'm starting to try and create this angle, obviously posture is the biggest thing at all times. As Rob is trying to get his posture corrected, we need to be controlling the head and even trying to create a twisting of the spine. That's going to solve so many of your problems that you're going to have. If Rob manages to take away my ability to create that dominant angle by blocking my hip here, if we just turn to the side a bit more, it's quite difficult now for me to be able to occlude the arteries on this side of his neck. What Rob loves to do is just make a fist and replace that shoulder with his own fist.
And when you add the posture break to that, that's when it really works amazingly well. As you're folding somebody over their own neck with your fist in the way, oh man.
A fist is going to be more representative of the shoulder and takes up more space. Be careful about taking your hand here, and if the ref can't tell that you're not just like closing it on the neck here. I mean, it's nicer for your training partner in a way. It's still your knuckles, so it's not nice, but make sure that it's clear what you're doing here. We're occluding the arteries. Depending on the situations, we can absolutely start to look at even accessing Kimuras. We can start to move into omoplata attacks. This is kind of bullshit, but again, with tall people, I really like the TP from here, which is I'm actually going to extend my legs out, wrap behind, and S-grip my hands below my knees so that I can squeeze everything together. What I'm more likely to get is Rob starting to try and posture up a bit here, which will give me space to start getting that elbow out of the way. And in this case, I decided to get more of an elbow pulled across because Rob's really doubling down on keeping his elbow blocking my hip here. And so by me being able to at least create some space to get out of the way, I can now create that dominant angle that I really wanted.
Yeah, and the options that you're creating when you're controlling the triangle are, you know, like Rory kind of went over different finishing options, and we can talk about transitioning into different versions of the triangle. Probably not within the scope of this video, because then we're going to start to get into side triangles and back triangles. But just know that when you're dealing with a triangle, your goal is to create an alternative finish. The omoplata, the armbar, we'll talk about arm bars in the next video, but the armbar is also an option there.
Yeah.
So like if we're dealing with this sort of situation
Where I'm just really keeping my posture strong enough and he doesn't feel like he can finish on,
I can even take
on the
it
triangle.
with this
You can do a triangle armbar or a full-on armbar with just both legs over my head. Those are both really good options.
in particular when people posture up like this. The triangle armbar where Rory rotates my wrist and just breaks it across his hip there is super available. So
another option, something that I've got so much mileage out of, is when they bring this elbow across like this. It's in Ryan Hall's DVD, highly recommended. I actually start loosening up this triangle so I can create more of an angle, go up belly down, and actually overwhelm Rob with my posts to then be able to go into mounted. And because the angle's off, you either have to learn to adjust the mounted triangle, or we can start switching more into traditional arm bars.
yeah, so it's important to keep in mind with when we're working with the triangle that it's, as we talked about, as Rory mentioned earlier, it's a position, and it's a very effective sweep delivery system. Because of the fact that we're controlling one arm so well within the triangle, it can be very difficult for the other person to post that arm. So if you start to feel like you can't finish on the triangle, and even you can't finish on the armbar. Like basically, the submission is not a good option because the other person's hunkering down. They're just really good. They got a tiny neck, tiny shoulders, whatever the reason is. Try to think about the fact that their arm is much less available to them than it would be, and you can generally knock them over the arm that's within the triangle. You can knock them over to that corner.
Pendulum sweep, essentially. So
Yeah.
here, if Rob puts me in the triangle, that leg that he ends up hooking, because this arm is kind of shoved up. Oh no.
I can just take him over whenever I want.
Here, let's get the back angle.
So I'm just hooking under his leg, and I'm not even closing the triangle really. I'm just dumping him over. And then I can move to the armbar, or this would be an example of one of those triangle alternatives, where rather than having my hamstring on Rory's neck, it's my Achilles tendon and my calf. So you can see kind of how deep this can start to go. This doesn't even really cover, this doesn't really even scratch the surface of how much you can do with the triangle configuration of having some sort of leg triangle shape around the shoulder girdle. The possibilities are pretty much endless.
Yeah, and so as you kind of saw there, we're starting to reference certain submissions like the armbar, the omoplata, the kimura, things that tie in really closely to that. And that will ultimately be your goal as you get more comfortable with jiu-jitsu and learn more techniques, that you want to start looking at submissions that are actually close to each other or close to the positions that you're starting to favor. So if you prefer mount or you prefer back control, starting to look from things that would tie there, because there's nothing wrong with it at first when you're kind of like dabbling in this new smorgasbord of all the different techniques out there. But eventually when you want to start refining your game, whether it's blue belt or definitely closer to purple, being able to tie these things together and be like, okay, well, if I work on the triangle and I work on the armbar, those two tie in really closely together. And then those can also tie in really well with my guard work.
Yep.
And they can even tie into mount. And then you can start to really plan this stuff out, where if you have two very separate things, like, well, I really like the ankle lock, and then I also like the rear naked choke. They're kind of at complete opposite ends from different positions, and you'll eventually find ways to bridge those gaps.
But you're just doing a lot more work.
You're doing a lot more work there. So yeah, the sooner you can start to figure out like the submission, this is why like someone like John Danaher, like you're gonna look even at his instructionals there, where it's like guillotine, kimura, armbar, triangle,
all very
leg locks, stuff that connects really well together. And leg locks will connect into that stuff because if we attack upper body and we draw those responses, the lower body becomes more available. So just a general overview. Hopefully you guys found some use out of it. Even the more advanced people, hopefully you guys got some use out of it. And we're going to do the same thing in the next video, talking about the armbar.